I'm Antoinette James, reporter in He-Waka-Putanga jurisdiction. Welcome to Behind the Beehive, where I look behind the corporation jurisdiction's political show and try and reveal the truth. And the truth today is that we are being gaslit. We are seeing the elites' order coming out of their created chaos. Gaslit because we are being sold the narrative that all the woes, all the climate change, all the woes that we see around us are because of us and the way we live. This is causing many people around the world to become victims, to act as remorseful perpetrators, to feel that they're criminals, and to abide by the herding tool of the elites through their documentation and government acts and legislations, etc. So it's time that we realised we're being scammed and push back. The elites have very kindly produced some documentation giving us a survival guide because we're in crisis, don't you know? And if it wasn't for the elites, where would we be? How would we ever navigate life? Now, all this comes out of the Club of Rome, and the Club of Rome made an announcement last year on their website. Launch events for Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity. Now, when they said Earth for All on their website, they did it grammatically, F-O-R, Earth for All. But then it kind of shifts a little bit once we look at the documentation, and we'll look at that shortly. So this is the 16th of August 2022, Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity, is a unique book. For the first time, it presents the results of a remarkable 2-year broad-minded research collaboration, Earth for All. Earth for All, now we change. No longer do we have 4, F-O-R, we have the numeral 4. So now that doesn't really make sense, but I'll explain what I think that means shortly. Earth for All brought together many of the world's leading economic thinkers and system dynamics scientists to explore 2 scenarios for this century. You know, we're feeling more comfortable already, aren't we? Just wonderful. Thank you, Club of Rome. Earth for All, that's the numeral 4. Let's have a look at that document, because that gives us a little bit more insight to what this great launch last year was all about. Quote, Earth for All is an international initiative to accelerate the systems change we need for an equitable future on a finite planet, combining the best available science with new economic thinking. Earth for All was designed to identify the transformations we need to create prosperity for all. Earth for All was initiated by the Club of Rome, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and the Norwegian Business School. It builds on legacies of the limits to growth and planetary boundaries frameworks. The kicker here is that it builds on the limits to growth, and that was a publication came out in 1972. And it will feature quite a bit in this talk today because everything sits on it. So firstly, from that little statement on Earth for All website, I would like to just touch base on some of the vocabulary there and interpret it. We're going to define Earth for, numeral 4, all. I see what they're doing. It's trying to take on that double meaning, but it also hides from the average person its real intent. When we see for, we've got to remember other ways they use that for, the elites use that for. They use it by saying we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution. So that's interesting. And when we look at what that means, particularly when we listen to Uncle Klaus, we learn very clearly AI and transhumanism. We also know that the elites are calling this new age that they're trying to push us into the fourth world. We have the first world, which is basically the West. We have the second world, which is the Eastern Bloc. We have the third world, which are the developing countries. All labels given to us by the elites, but they're bringing us to the fourth world, which will be this oligarchical, tyrannical age. And we also have that fourth coming in the Fourth Reich, because Germany is the seat of the Vatican, really, or parts of Germany, Prussia and all that kind of area. But they claim Germany. That's why it's really been Germany that's been steering the European Union, because the European Union is the vanguard of the United Nations, and the United Nations is the shopfront of the Vatican. If they came at us like they did during the 1,000-year Dark Age, we would see it for what it is. So the Vatican, the papacy, won't do that. So they created in the early 1900s, 1947, 6, somewhere around there, the United Nations. That was their second attempt to have a shop front for themselves. So we need to understand that Germany went through the First Reich, the Second Reich, the Third Reich, Hitler's Third Reich, and now they're bringing in the Fourth Reich. And Reich just means regime or empire or world. And that Fourth Reich is going to be a one world governance with a one world religion. So that defines what they mean by that little sneaky numeral 4 in the title. So let's define equitable, because they talk about equity. And now this is actually an insurance term. It is not something that means equal in any way. We often seem to think it does. We also seem to think that it means, to be fair, fairness, that we divvy out things clearly, but it doesn't mean that. It means that in the insurance terms that you pay your money to us, and we'll kind of work out what we'll give back. So it's not even scales; it's tipped scales. Now, early in 2020 in Washington legislature, an inquiry task force was assembled, and they defined the word equity as disrupt and dismantle. That's very clear. You couldn't get it clearer. That's their definition. So systematic revolution through the institutions, which we know Mao Zedong's long march through the institutions. This is what it's all about. It's steered by the UN, and the World Economic Forum has really risen to the forefront over the last, I'd say, 5 years anyway. Maybe we knew about them before, but really it's really taking the forefront now. I think partly because the United Nations are just wanting to slip back and do all their nefarious business a little bit undercover, and they're allowing the World Economic Forum to move forward. This task force made it really clear. They understood that it meant disrupt and dismantle. And they were actually wondering at that time whether they should even expose it. They knew that it was going to be dangerous, but they also knew that most of we, the people, really aren't engaged across the board in what's happening. They realized, quote, that there was a very overt and a naked definition, but they just said it anyway and ducked for cover, and there was very little resistance. Okay, let's define the word science. Now, up until the Enlightenment period, science was always connected to theology, always connected to God. Science was never separated. No scientist of any value would ever separate the creator from their research in science. It just never happened. This is Charles Lyell, father of modern geology, and he is the old Earth model that we came out from the primordial soup as little amoeba, and somehow we evolved over millions of years. There are many scientists that know what a crock that is now. They don't always agree with creation 7 days, but they do agree that evolution's a crock. And they call themselves intelligent design. So they're not willing to go to the point that we have a God that created us. But they will say that this has not happened randomly. The world was not created randomly. It's got design. Anyway. So this is Charles Lyell. He was an atheist. Of course, he wanted to expunge God from science. He said, I want to free the science of geology from Moses. And when you read Exodus and Genesis, and you read those early books that also make up the Torah, always was, and even linguists will tell you that those books were written as history. They're not written as myth. That's just part of the narrative that the elites want us to have so that we don't take the Bible seriously, particularly the King James Bible. Here's another quote. This is Dr. William B. Provine, Professor of Biological Sciences in Cornell University. He died in 2015. Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tell us loud and clear. There is no God, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I am going to be dead. That's the end of me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning to life. Well, he's found out now, hasn't he? This is the mindset of the modern scientist, because you don't become a well-known scientist if you have a contrary narrative to the Aristotelian Darwinian narrative. Let's define new economic thinking that the quote of Earth for All mentioned. This is a well-being economy. This isn't about finances. This is about human capital. The World Economic Forum have produced a document on the world's human capital. We're just cattle, just out in the paddock. In New Zealand, 2018, Comrade Ardern's government put out a document, beginning of a conversation on the human capital in New Zealand. Who's going to be culled? Where we're going to put people. They're managing us like cattle. And that is a well-being economy. And that is what the Waikato Initiative is all about. And this is why the New Zealand Treasury is part of the well-being economy, because at the end of the day, we will have no money. It'll just be credits. And the Treasury will need something to do. We are the new money. That's all we are, to be traded off and to be moved around by the elites. The New Zealand Treasury have Waikato Initiative indicators. We in the Waikato are being audited. Here's another quote. This is from weall.org. Remember my last video? Let me quote. A well-being economy government's partnership, that's WeGo, is a collaboration of national, regional governments interested in sharing expertise and transferable policy practices to advance their shared ambition of building well-being economies. WeGo was founded on the recognition that development in the 21st century entails delivering human and ecological well-being, and currently compromises 6 nation governments: Scotland, New Zealand, Iceland, Wales, Finland and Canada. And they had their first conference, I think, in South Korea, and I believe Australia is going to be joining them soon. So what does well-being mean? Well, let's refresh ourselves again from a United Nations document. well-being according to UN. This is in their Biodiversity Treaty, UN Global Biodiversity Assessment. And it says, people are then members of a community of beings living and non-living. Thus, rivers may be viewed as mothers and animals may be treated as kin. The document talks about rocks as well. We have the well-being of a rock because they're part of our community. So when you hear the word well-being, don't think it's caring for us as sovereign and independent individuals with the right to live a free and happy life. No. Well-being of we the people as rivers, as a rock, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with them? Total control. Okay, another definition we need to attend to that was mentioned in that Earth for All statement I read out is the Club of Rome. Let's define the Club of Rome. Now we know socialism doesn't just come from nowhere. There are quotes, I think it's Lenin, democracy is the first step to socialism. And we know socialism is the slow march to communism. Socialism is that long march through the institution. It comes in slowly. It's not a revolution. It's done by people suited up and cleanly shaven. It's done through foundations like the Bill and Melinda Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Soros Open Society Foundations, the Clinton Foundation, and I can go on and on and on, and unions like the European Union, and charities like Barnardo's and Common Purpose, and secret societies like the Club of Rome and Bilderberg. It was the Council of Foreign Relations, that's the US, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England, both Jesuit controlled, that really are behind these secret societies, these round table and advisory secret societies, just like the Club of Rome. So we're looking at a Jesuit or a Vatican controlled society. They say it's all informal, but it's very secret. And it's ruling everything. It's a think tank. Well, the movers and shakers of the Club of Rome created the United Nations. And when the United Nations was first introduced, the Club of Rome movers and shakers created the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. And it's this documentation, this group, that's causing all the climate treaties and conventions that our governments are forcing us into. It's just fear-mongering and propagandizing, and they had to do that first. They had to browbeat us. They had to gaslight us to get our attention because we were sleeping. And first, the big corps destroyed our ecology. Then they blamed us. First, they took out the glass milk bottles and, many times said we weren't allowed backyard fires, and they brought in plastic to make a Rockefeller Foundation rich, and then they blamed us. So the Club of Rome are also the architects of the Earth Charter, mainly put together by Maurice Strong and Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union. They are both Freemasons, and they're both in the Club of Rome. And it was the Club of Rome that divided up through the United Nations the Earth into 10 different regions, and they call them unions. European Union. The European Union, the elites want to move that further. They're wanting to turn that into the United States of Europe. Then they'll have the United States of America, which will take in Canada and also South America. Then they put New Zealand in with China. That's why everything that our governments are doing really is in a collaboration with some Chinese big corp, because we're we're in a corporation fascist society now. Now, the Committee of 300 charged the Club of Rome with the plan to propagate the notion that we were overpopulated. We had the population bomb. Paul Ehrlich, as you know, came out in the 60s, and there was documentation galore that came out. I go into all this very clearly in Under the Shadow, Agenda 21 in New Zealand. And although it's a New Zealand lens, there's much in that publication that's quite good for an international readership. If you're wanting to know more of the ins and outs and the movers and shakers of that and why we are where we are today, that would be a good read for you. Let me give you this quote from David Rockefeller. He's a Club of Rome member, clearly. I think he led it there for a while, along with the Bilderberger. You know, they're often in quite a few of these secret societies so that they can make sure they are all heading in the same direction. He said, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Thank you, Club of Rome. First, we destroy the culture and the rhythm of colonial China, and we bring in Mao, that slob. It was the Club of Rome in 1992 that said the earth was running out of gold and silver and mercury and petroleum and copper and natural gas, and all that was going to run out before the 21st century. Well, we're well into the second decade of the 21st century, and we're far from running out, because most of the world's resources are not finite, they are renewable, but we're not allowed to know that. Here's another quote. This is according to the Club of Rome's website. The Club of Rome is an organization of individuals who share a common concern for the future of humanity and strive to make a difference. Our members are notable scientists, economists, businessmen and businesswomen, high-level civil servants and former heads of state from around the world. We're basically looking at a revolving door situation of socialists that are chosen. Many of them would have been Rhodes scholars, so they're well drenched in the narrative. Another mover and shaker, now passed away, is Hugh Fant, and of the United Nations, and this is a quote from the Limits to Growth, the 30-year update, 2004, page 13. I do not wish to seem overdramatic, but I can only conclude from the information that is available to me as Secretary General of the members of the United Nations have perhaps 10 years left in which to subordinate their ancient quarrels and launch a global partnership to curb the arms race, to improve human environment, to diffuse the population explosion, and supply the required momentum to world development efforts. So that shows you that they're using all their energies to push towards a one world government. And one of their tools is climate change. There is no climate change that we need to be alarmed about at all, but it's a helpful tool. So it was the Club of Rome that initiated Global 2000, and that was reports calling for the culling of the world's population by the year 2050. And I think over the last 2 years with the bioweapon injection, I think they're well underway to reaching some of those goals. The Club of Rome is described as a crisis think tank, and not only is it trying to curb a crisis, but they specialize in creating the crisis, hence global warming. Here's another quote from one of the movers and shakers, again deceased now, Marie Strong. Under the Shadow, I do a bit of a bio on him. I do a little bit of a semi-deep dive on quite a few of the players in this created crisis that the elites have orchestrated. Quote, "It is clear the current styles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen convenience foods, the use of fossil fuels, ownership motor vehicles, small electrical appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. You middle class, you're going to go." I think we're already being attacked over the last, got to be 50 plus years now. The middle class is shrinking under corporate fascism. They're really pushing to have our meat intake go, and urban housing as well. That urban sprawl is going to be stack and pack. Agenda 2030 human settlements. As you know, in everything, all roads lead to Rome. And yeah, the Vatican, Mr. Pope, he's right in there, boots and all. Because remember, the United Nations is the shop front of the Vatican, and all these secret societies are run by Jesuits. Club of Rome, no surprises that it's called the Club of Rome. The Vatican sits on the ancient site of the temple to Jupiter. Jupiter is Satan, and Mithraism is the worship of Satan, and papal organization, the Vatican, the papacy, is Mithraism with a very thin Christian veil. I will say again, this is not against Roman Catholics that love the Lord and have Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. We're not talking about them. We're talking about organization. And I've given plenty of citation for that in other videos, and I won't put it in here. So let's just have a look at some quotes, though, that kind of bring this into a perspective for us. Alexander King, 1982 interview. With him, Club of Rome founder mainly was interested in population, and he comes out of the Vatican. Quote, "The Club of Rome has some very good conditions with the Vatican through Cardinal Koenig of Vienna, or Koenig. Koenig has come to a number of Club of Rome meetings. He's talked to the Pope about our work, not population, but on microchips. And out of this, the Pope himself has proposed a meeting with Piche and myself." Remember the name Piche, that comes in very shortly. "We have other contacts in the Vatican. There is a man named Chagas from Brazil, who is the chairman of the Pontifical Academy of Science." Now there's another Vatican man, and his name is Professor Hans Schnellhuber, founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Club of Rome member, Pontifical Academy of Science, and threat of global warming advisor to German President Angela Merkel. This is an article that was published. Vatican climate change speaker wants Earth Constitution, individual CO2 budget. I'm not going to read the article, but you can see how it all dovetails. But I will read this. This is a Daniel Taylor article of 2015. And this was released just prior to the Vatican releasing Pope Francis's letter addressing climate change. But Schnellhuber is mentioned in it. So let's hear a little bit more about him and his agenda. Schnellhuber is well known for promoting draconian measures to combat climate change. In 2009, he proposed a CO2 budget for every individual on the planet. He has also put forth a master plan for transforming society that involves creating a system of world government, including an Earth Constitution, a global council, and a planetary court. Global warming science itself is surrounded by fraud. There is also a global agenda that is depending on the survival of the idea of global warming. All this transformation, the Earth Constitution, the Global Council, they're all well up and going. I did a video on that probably 2 years ago. Here's a quote from a Club of Rome article, 2015. The Vatican has got it right, talking about the papal encyclical on the environment, or the papal letter, which introduced the idea of zero growth. Quote, limits to growth in the 1970s. Pope makes points that are indistinguishable from those that the Club of Rome has been making for years, says Roberto Piche, Vice President. Wouldn't you know? What a coincidence. Well, not much of a coincidence when the Vatican Jesuits are the organisers of the whole agenda and the secret societies. So no surprises there at all. Let's have a look at Pope Francis' encyclical letter. He expresses his lengthy view on unsustainable humanity. Of course, the elites are exempt from that. It's just we, the people. Of course, he uses hoax research, and people have pushed back against this letter of Pope Francis. He just regurgitates anything from the Club of Rome. Quote, number 3 of his letter. Now, faced as we are with this global environmental deterioration, I wish to address every person living on the planet. Number 51. The warming caused by a huge consumption on the part of some rich countries has repercussions on the poorest areas of the world. 175, yes, long letter. It is essential to devise stronger and more efficiently organised international institutions with functionaries who are appointed fairly by agreement among national governments and empowered to impose sanctions. So basically a one-word government. They're empowered to make those decisions and impose sanctions. Functionaries, I love that word. That's a real Inquisition word. And we know all about the Inquisition during the Dark Ages. You didn't last long if you did the slightest of heresy, like you didn't take your hat off as you walked past a Roman Catholic church, or more, you didn't bow as you walked past a Roman Catholic church. It got a lot worse too, by the way. So how's it got this far?